A Captain and a Madman by RazielZonoran. Chapter 17. So much for the plan. Captain's Log, Supplemental. Voyager is on an intercept course with the Borg sphere. Its course hasn't changed since we first detected it, which hopefully means it has yet to consider our approach noteworthy. The Doctor and our engineering department have been working tirelessly to adjust our energy signature, and we've cut power to all non-essential systems. With any luck, that will be enough. Although the Doctor seems completely confident in his plan, and Picard is claiming full faith in him, something tells me that I'm not being told everything. Certainly, while the plan seems reasonable on the surface, as reasonable as trying to break into the Borg Collective's subspace network could be, I'm not entirely convinced. For one, the Doctor has made repeated requests not to be accompanied by any security personnel, something that seems unnecessarily reckless. For another, I can't help but question why he needs our ship in the first place. Picard suggested that his TARDIS has the ability to transport through energy shields, solid matter. Could it not just take him where he needed to go? The Doctor has insisted it is to be certain the Borg cannot assimilate it, but the fact that it's in my shuttle bay just makes Voyager feel like too much of a target. I've been weighing the risks of this plan against the potential gain, and though the circumstances are not ideal, I can't deny the benefit this could bring, to the Federation at large, and to our voyage home. I can just hope that this decision, and this course, doesn't cut that voyage short. She considered continuing, but her ready room door chimed a second later. End log, Janeway instructed curtly before calling, "Come." The Doctor stepped in, sonic screwdriver twirling between his fingers as he glanced around the ready room with the brief interest he seemed to have in pretty much everything. Janeway, for her part, didn't speak first, allowing the Doctor to satisfy his curiosity until her guest finally turned his slightly confused gaze towards her. "You wished to see me, Captain?" the Time Lord asked, hands now sliding on his pockets, brow raised. "I did," Janeway replied, setting down the PADD. "How are the modifications coming along?" "Oh, swimmingly," came the chipper reply, the Doctor's shoulders shifting in a carefree shrug as he gave her a boyish smile. "Your crew, grand bunch, follow instructions to A.T. when needed, minimum of fussing about. We'll be more and ready by the time we reach the sphere, you have my word on that." "Lieutenant Torres tells me the conduit modifications are impressive work," Janeway replied, settling onto her chair with a casual air that rather immediately put the Time Lord on alert. "But you haven't made any modifications to our shields, engines, or weapons." "Well, me and weapons," the Doctor's hand waggled in an uncertain gesture. "I understand your distaste for them," Janeway replied, spreading her hands, still sounding perfectly reasonable. "But if we're not able to get close enough to the sphere without triggering a hostile response, if your camouflage doesn't work," the Doctor interjected, looking a bit annoyed. "It will. If it doesn't," she continued, a bit of an edge creeping into her tone, "then this entire ship is going to be put at risk. We can likely evade the sphere, maybe even destroy it, but without a significant tactical advantage, we'll have no means to disable it just enough to accomplish your objective." "As I said," came the stubborn reply as the Doctor lifted a single admonishing finger, "it will work." There was a long, tense moment as Janeway stared at him, clearly not putting much faith in the Doctor's assurances. Finally, she gave a single, curt nod, but when the Doctor turned to leave, she lifted a hand to stop him. "I've made a small change to the original plan," Janeway explained, spreading her hands. "Lieutenant Commander Tuvok will be leading the security team that accompanies you aboard the sphere." There it was, clear as day, brief surprise across the Time Lord's face, irritation, and then a diplomatic smile. "Captain," came the friendly, if nervous, reply, "that's hardly necessary. I've been roaming lethal corridors for considerably longer than your species has been in space. I assure you, I'm more than capable of completing the infiltration without your security chief. His place should be on the bridge. If your camouflage is as effective as you assure me," Janeway replied tersely, "we won't need a senior tactical officer, will we? Besides which, Mr. Tuvok thinks it would be wise to have someone with more extensive experience with Borg vessels join you, and he has considerable tactical expertise. I agree with his assessment, and so if you want our help, then he'll be accompanying you." The Time Lord seemed prepared to argue the point further, but after a few seconds, his mouth snapped shut, a thin smile on his face as he gave a single brisk nod. Right. The doctor cleared his throat as he started to edge towards the doors. Wonderful. Anything else? As a matter of fact, there is. Climbing to her feet, she advanced slowly until they were all but nose to nose. The fact that she had to look up didn't seem to bother her in the slightest, and by contrast, the doctor looked more than a little unnerved by the proximity, leaning back just a little with a decidedly displeased frown crossing his face. "I know you probably mean well," Janeway said slowly, eyes all but boring into his, "but I want you to keep in mind what's at stake here, the least of which is this ship, and this crew. We've gone along with your plan because there's potential in it, but sometimes one of the most valuable traits for a commanding officer is knowing when to cut and run. My people are coming with you to make sure you don't put yourself, and this entire quadrant, in harm's way, but I'll be damned if you put them in any either. Whatever you think about this data, it isn't worth their lives, or yours. Is that clear?" The Time Lord's ire seemed to soften a bit as he considered the words, head finally inclining ever so slightly. "You have my word," he replied softly. "I guarantee your people will return safe and sound." "Thank you." Stepping away from him, she nodded towards the door. "Dismissed." With a jaunty little salute, the doctor whirled around on his heels and vanished out the door. His prior irritation seemed to have vanished, but that brief glimpse had been more than enough to fuel the captain's suspicion as to just how confident or honest he really was. As the doors hissed shut behind him, Janeway settled back into her seat and tossed the PADD to one side. Something about all this was unnerving her to no end, but no matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't pinpoint any concrete reason to call off the mission. Nothing concrete had changed, after all. Not yet. The atmosphere on the bridge was tense, the eyes of every officer locked on the view screen. The Borg sphere was displayed, steadily growing larger as Voyager closed the gap between them. It hadn't shown any sign of noticing, or rather caring, that they were drawing close, as beyond a cursory sensor scan, it hadn't reacted to their presence. Still, with every passing moment Janeway expected to hear that their weapons had armed. And once glance at Picard, seated in Chakotay's customary chair, showed he wasn't any more pleased to be so near. His face was pale, and his knuckles white as he clutched the arms of the chair. 5 billion kilometers and closing, Paris announced. We'll be in transporter range in 5 minutes. Climbing to her feet, Janeway glanced over his shoulder with a curt nod. Janeway to engineering, report. The modifications seem to be working, Torres replied from engineering. Power output is at 20%, and our signatures being scrambled. We're having to tap into auxiliary power to maintain warp speed, and we won't be able to go any faster at current levels. Understood, Janeway replied. Prepare to go to full power if necessary. Yes, Captain. Torres out. Chakotay to away team, the first officer spoke next. We'll be intercepting the sphere in a few minutes. Stand by for transport. Down in the transporter room, Tuvok tapped his com badge, keeping an eye on the distracted doctor. Understood, sir. Tuvok nodded towards the handful of security personnel assembled, and they shuffled onto the transporter pad together, performing final checks on their phasers. The doctor had protested the inclusion of weapons, but only briefly, as he seemed to accept that he wasn't going to be swaying anyone's decision on that front. The doctor himself was unarmed, naturally, without even his sonic screwdriver. He had insisted on leaving it behind with Picard, in fact, apparently unwilling to run the risk that the Borg might acquire it. Admitting that there was a risk of anything falling into Borg hands hadn't exactly filled the crew with confidence, but the doctor hadn't acknowledged the hypocrisy, continuing to act supremely self-assured. Remember what we discussed, Doctor, Janeway's voice piped through chidingly. Of course, Captain, the Time Lord replied cheerfully, adjusting his suit jacket. You can count on me. The next few minutes stretched out in silence, the security personnel shifting restlessly, constantly checking their equipment to ensure they were functional. While nobody looked thrilled at the prospect of boarding a Borg ship with the obvious exception of the doctor, the security personnel bore their anxiety stoically enough, looking more determined than frightened. Finally, the word was given. Away team, we're in range. Nodding towards the transporter operator, the doctor jabbed a finger at him, disintegrate. The transporter operator, fingers poised over the control, paused just long enough to stare incredulously at the Time Lord. Energize, Tuvok clarified, sounding for him a little irritated. As the hum of the transporter filled the air, the doctor snapped his fingers. Energize, right, that sounds. Dash 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 dash. Loads more appealing. The away team materialized in one of the sphere's many unremarkable corridors, facing different directions with weapons drawn. The beam-in point was near the sphere's outer hull, as interference had prevented them from getting a very accurate sensor lock of the core, but the doctor had assured them they wouldn't need to go too far to find an appropriate access port. Tricorder out, the doctor spun in a slow circle, eyes locked eagerly on the tiny display, and when it gave a chipper little beep, he nodded, satisfied. All right, the doctor said quietly, I want you lot to stay here and secure the area or something. The security personnel glanced at one another, surprised and perhaps a little relieved, but Tuvok only frowned. Do you intend to infiltrate the ship's interior unaided? The Vulcan asked. The doctor waved a hand casually over his shoulder, still eyeing his tricorder. I'll be fine. Doctor, Tuvok replied persistently, drawing an irritated sigh from the Time Lord. The beam-in point is only lightly populated by drones, and possesses no security measures. Our support will be needed far less here than it will be further into the complex. I must therefore insist we accompany you, unless you have a reason we should remain here. The Time Lord's mouth opened, then shut, and opened a second time before he muttered reluctantly, nothing reasonable comes to mind. Then we will accompany you, Tuvok reiterated. Dandy. Glowering, the Time Lord whirled away and began to make his way down the corridor, tricorder held out in front of him. Come along, then. Weapons half raised, they moved deeper into the sphere, security personnel constantly watching their surroundings. The only one who seemed completely unaware of the world around him was the doctor, whose eyes remained glued on his tiny little tricorder screen, running multiple scans of their surroundings. A pair of drones emerged from around a corner and began to approach the group. The security team stiffened, but stepped out of their path, accustomed to their customary behavior. Sure enough, the drones marched right past them, seemingly unaware of their existence, even as the doctor finally tore his eyes away from the tricorder, following the drones a few paces down the hall and getting almost close enough to touch so he could ogle their implants. Tuvok whispered for him to stop, and the Time Lord reluctantly did, still peering at the departing drones as he returned to the security team. Just a bit curious is all. The Time Lord gave a satisfied grunt, once more leading the way. See, nothing to worry about. Voyager to away team, Janeway's voice piped up, the transmission crackling just a little. We've lost our transporter lock on you. Report. Tuvok glanced towards the doctor, who winced and shrugged. Mostly nothing, the doctor replied sheepishly, studying his readings. The central core seems to be generating too much interference beyond this point. Nothing I can do about it, but it only extends this far. We'll still be able to beam out of our original entry point. Even behind stoic Vulcan calm, Tuvok seemed to scowl just a little as he tapped his com badge. Captain, the doctor tells us that the interior core is too heavily shielded. All measures will be taken to ensure we have an open path to return to the transport site if necessary, and we will keep you apprised. Very well. Voyager out. They continued in silence, pausing or shifting aside on occasion to allow drones to filter past on their usual duties. The corridors grew more twisted and labyrinthine the further in they went, and the background hum of the sphere grew louder with each passing moment. Though the security team tensed more and more by the moment, with the possible exception of Tuvok, the doctor looked more as if he were a tourist on the beach, even stopping here and there to get a closer look at a particular component or control panel. The first obstacle came when the doctor stopped in front of a section of corridor, lifting a hand to signal for the others to stop. The reason became clear as one of the drones filtered past. As it stepped through an archway, the air around it sparked and rippled, a wall of light appearing for just a moment. Force field, the doctor said quietly. I suppose they're tired of having folks run willy-nilly through the important bits. Is there an alternate path around it? Tuvok asked, stepping to one side as an oblivious drone moved past. No, the Time Lord replied, frowning at the tricorder as his fingers danced across it. But might be a way through it. One of the advantages of a subspace network is that absolutely everything seems to be wireless. There's some low-level encryption I should be able to bypass without raising an alarm. accessing internal sensors, security measures, and the force field snapped off. Ah, there we are. With a satisfied hum, the doctor gestured for the others to follow with one hand, even as the other continued to hold up his tricorder, head tilting from side to side as he tried to pin down where he had to be. The central plexus would be too heavily shielded, and too well guarded, but he didn't need it. All he needed to find was a suitable concentration of command and control interfaces, something that would look like a fair place to try installing a backdoor program. Finally, they found such a thing, likely intended as a power regulator. The computer banks were located in a small, rectangular chamber with corridors branching off on 3 sides. The walls were covered with Borg control panels, but the processing hardware itself was quite innocuous, looking like the same featureless, dark metallic mesh box that most of the ship looked like, but the doctor could detect plenty of busy processes at work in its circuitry. Better yet, it seemed to link to the central plexus, perhaps suggesting the collective regulated the ship's reactors. Either way, it granted him a way into the Borg's network. Take up positions, the doctor instructed quietly. As Tuvok and his team moved to keep watch over the corridors, the Time Lord began his preliminary analysis of the computer banks, frowning and trying to figure the best way to proceed. "Doctor," Tuvok called quietly, "I do not wish to needlessly hasten you, but under the circumstances, how long do you believe you will need?" "No idea," the doctor murmured, turning his attention back to the tricorder and beginning to write the first sequence of code. "Here goes nothing. Dash 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 dash." The one of the Borg sensed this clumsy intrusion as if it were a jab in the arm. Nestled not in her inefficient humanoid body, but instead in the infinite banks of the collective mind, she turned a small portion of her attention to this curious infiltration. It took mere nanoseconds to trace it to a sphere that was running a scouting mission far beyond the borders of Borg space. A brief review of its logs revealed that a ship classified irrelevant had approached the sphere a little over half an hour ago. That was all the information available, as the protocols aboard the sphere had deemed the vessel too unimportant to even monitor. Curious, she accessed external sensors, and quickly determined the power signature was falsified. Compensating, she adjusted to visual sensors instead, only to be greeted with a disgustingly familiar sight. Voyager. Naturally. Had she a head, it would have tilted as the one considered how best to handle this. Attack outright, seek to assimilate, or to destroy. Perhaps contact it first, make it clear that it had been detected, that its little landing party had been found. Intimidation was irrelevant, yes, but there was nonetheless a small, secret part of her that delighted in it. Even as she juggled those ideas, she turned her attention towards the intruders aboard her sphere, studying them with the internal sensors. The Vulcan security officer. A handful of humans. No Janeway, more's the pity. But there was one other occupant, one who did not match any of Voyager's crew manifest. A being, indeed, who wasn't even human, as two hearts betrayed the man's true nature, two hearts. Had the one a heart of her own, it would have frozen in shock, then swollen in joy. It was him. The one abandoned all other processes that demanded her attention, tossed aside any considerations and began to focus the full might of her mind upon that one sphere, that one small, insignificant vessel, and the very significant creature aboard it. A creature that promised to bring a level of biological and technological distinctiveness that the one could scarcely have dreamed possible. A new era, a new age. She knew enough, from the stories of countless assimilated worlds, to know just what he was, just as she knew that he shouldn't exist. But he did. He was here, and she would never let him leave. Had she lips, she would have smiled with delight. As it were, the deep cavernous multiplex mind echoed with dark, delighted laughter. Dash 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 dash. Oh. The away team looked up sharply as the Time Lord's discouraging murmur. "What is it?" Tuvok asked, eyes narrowing slightly as he shifted a bit restlessly, glancing back out into the hallway. "Wheel," the doctor cleared his throat, head tilting to one side as he glanced over his shoulder. "It appears that a scattering field has been activated." Tuvok's hand tapped his badge quickly, Tuvok to Voyager. A long pause, and no reply, prompted another tap. "Voyager, please respond." No good, the doctor replied, shaking his head sharply as he started to tap quickly on the tricorder's controls. Communications blocked, and I sincerely doubt they could even manage a sensor lock on us through this shielding. I'm trying to access the sphere's internal sensors, but something's locked me out again. I think we might be in. Sir, one of the security guards called out, and Tuvok's eyes widened as he saw no less than 7 drones moving down that one hallway alone. A call from the other 2 entranced confirmed that they were being surrounded, with too many drones clogging each hallway to offer even the faint hope of breaking past them. Jaw set, the security personnel began to open fire, and the first drone dropped, then the second, the third, fourth, fifth. Only for the phaser beam to be absorbed harmlessly by a force field generated by the sixth. For every drone they had disabled, 2 more seemed to arrive, an unprecedented number that swarmed the corridors, drawing closer, closer. But then, suddenly, it bounced back as a force field sprung to life, first over one entrance, then over the other 2, keeping the Borg at bay. I've activated the force fields surrounding this chamber, the doctor reported, fingers dancing over the tricorder keys as he glanced from side to side, tongue pressing to the corner of his mouth, remodulated it so they can't just pass through, and encrypted the access protocols. It should keep them out. I'm trying to disable the scattering field, but there look to be 5 redundant systems generating it, so it's going to take me a little while too. A low hum started to fill the room, the ship itself, seeming to permeate the very air, mingling with the crackles of the drones trying to push through the force field. The ship's transwarp drive is activating, the doctor murmured, paling. There must be a node nearby. If the ship jumps to transwarp, Voyager'll never be able to find us. Can you prevent it? Tuvok asked urgently. No, it's wired into a completely different subsystem, I wouldn't be able to. The doctor's eyes lit up as he considered a nearby panel. There is something I can do, though. What? Keep a promise. Reaching the control panel, his fingers started to dance across it in a quick flurry of motion. Before Tuvok could even guess as to the doctor's intentions, let alone stop him, there was a sudden distortion as the sphere's transporters beamed Tuvok and the security team away. The Time Lord, however, did not vanish, and deliberately so. Voyager would just become a priority target if he returned there now. It seemed he was committed to this course. The doctor gave a satisfied grunt as he pulled away, popping open his tricorder once more and considering the readings. Already, an external force was starting to dismantle the encryption he'd placed over force field control, and he quickly set to randomize the encryption, trying to stay one step ahead of it. Unfortunately, he was limited not necessarily by his intellect, but by his tool, whatever was working on the other end. It was interfaced directly to the sphere's systems, writing counter code at literally the speed of thought. Relegated to punching all his brilliant ideas into a physical interface, the doctor was simply too slow to keep up. All right, then, the doctor growled, his fingers dancing across the tricorder, and then the Borg control interface, then the tricorder again, moving in a near blur, but losing ground all the while. I'm not leaving here without that data, so why don't you give it up right now before you start to make me really cross? No, no, don't you dare try to drop the force fields, don't you bloody dare. There was a sudden crackle as the force fields shut off. Nearly 24 drones began to file into the chamber, moving slowly, mechanically, inevitably towards the Time Lord. Head swiveling first in one direction, then the other, the doctor automatically began to reach for his sonic screwdriver, then began to laugh helplessly when he remembered he had left it behind. Right, doctor, brilliant idea, that. He snapped, even as he backed away, fingers still dancing with near desperation now. Transporter control was completely blocked off now, he couldn't have so much as beamed to another part of the sphere. One by one, the systems he had broken into were resealing themselves, and as the seconds ticked by, he realized that he wouldn't have enough time to. A cold hand closed around his wrist, tightening to the point that the doctor could feel the small bones in his wrist scraping together. The tricorder fell from his nerveless hand as he tried to pull away, then push past. But another pair of hands were gripping him now, by the shoulder, and then by the scalp, pushing his head to one side. And then, pain. Just a pinch at first, a pair of them at his neck, but as he felt something foreign flood his blood vessels, spreading throughout his body, his limbs seemed to burn with unending fire. The doctor managed one last scream of rage, of pain, of pure denial, before the world itself seemed to filter away, reality losing color, and then shape, and then light. His legs failed him, and the Time Lord had some brief sensation of falling before the cold and the darkness took him away. Dash 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 dash. The sphere vanished in a flash of green radiance as the ship jumped to transwarp, leaving Voyager far behind. On the bridge, Catherine Janeway stood and slowly approached the viewscreen, as if expecting the ship to come back at any moment. Seated in the first officer's chair, Picard could only clutch at the armrests and stare blankly at it, disbelief etched on his face. When the silence on the bridge was broken by the hiss of the turbolift doors, the entire bridge crew jumped, just a little, whirling around. Janeway's eyes widened as Tuvok stepped onto the bridge. Tuvok. Relief and confusion mingled in Janeway's voice as she glanced briefly back towards the viewscreen. What the hell happened over there? The Borg detected our intrusion, Tuvok reported grimly. It appears the Doctor was able to return us to Voyager, but he himself did not accompany us during transport. It is possible the Borg were able to prevent his own escape. Or he knew we'd be a target if he returned, Picard interjected, twisting in his seat to glance at the Chief of Security. Were they able to capture him? Did you see if they overpowered him? I did not, Tuvok replied, shaking his head. However, the chamber we were in had been surrounded by a large number of drones. It is unlikely he will have been able to successfully evade them, and he remained unarmed. Unless he found some manner of ending his own life. Captain, it is safe to assume that they have assimilated him. Janeway considered that for a long moment, eyes glimmering with building ire. Anything else? Tuvok shook his head, and at Janeway's nod, he resumed his post at tactical. Voyager's captain settled back into her chair and sighed, rubbing at her forehead as she thought things through, acutely aware that Picard was watching her like a hawk. Finally, decision made, she stepped towards the con. Mr. Paris, Janeway instructed, resume our previous heading. Belay that, Picard interjected, climbing to his feet and turning towards Janeway, we cannot leave. I beg your pardon. Janeway snapped, head twisting to consider her fellow CO with disbelief and irritation mingling in her voice. Whatever his suicidal plan costs the Quadrant in the long run, I won't put this ship at any further risk just to see if the Borg decide we're still a worthwhile target. I am aware of the risks, Captain. Picard's jaw tightened. But we have to hold position, at least for the next few hours. He may return, to depart now would be foolish. Janeway glowered at Picard for a long moment, but her fellow captain did not waver, his gaze fixed. The bridge crew with the exception of Tuvok shifted uncomfortably in the ensuing silence, Paris's hands hovering over the con station as he waited for some confirmation. Mr. Paris, Janeway instructed, voice tight. Get us the hell out of here. Maximum warp. Yes, ma'am. I want to see you in my ready room, Picard. Captain Janeway. Now. Spinning on heel, Janeway all but stormed into her ready room, the doors hissing shut and leaving the bridge in complete silence. Picard turned towards the helm, where a course was already being entered, and he even considered trying to pull rank, but considering how ineffective other officers' attempts to commandeer the Enterprise had been in the past, he knew it would likely just get him confined to quarters. Still, his own temper was beginning to simmer, and it was with a grim face and squared shoulders that he stepped into the other captain's ready room, more than prepared to battle this out if need be. Dash 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 dash. Yes, they had him. He was theirs. Every circuit hummed and sparked with excitement as the one sent its loyal sphere an immediate command. Ignore Voyager, the vessel was inconsequential. Direct all resources to returning to Unimatrix 01. Seal him in a restraining cell. Even post a pair of loyal drones to watch him at all times, should he somehow attempt escape. With those commands given, the one fell deeper into the subspace network, communicating directly with the microscopic devices that were even now permeating his cells. The one was impressed. His body was resistant, highly so, to the nanoprobes, his very cells fighting back tenaciously. Left on a sphere, without additional support, it was unlikely that they could have assimilated him, as much of her influence was muffled by distance. But once he had been brought to her, once he was within her full grasp, her own nanoprobes could resume the work, and break down his biology utterly. For now, she sent the probes a directive to keep the subject unconscious, and to focus all its energies on multiplication, to deny his body's efforts to cast them out. His analysis, and his assimilation, all in good time.